Now, you guys all had access to Learning Hub? You're feeling, yeah? Okay, good, good. Today's a little softer lesson than most, only because of that just getting familiar reason. So I'm just gonna go double check. And I just realized that I didn't actually save my own intro to this hard drive. So let me just do it this way. I'll cheat. There we go. Not the most elegant, it's not a PowerPoint today, but that's all right. Okay. Oh, almost okay, come on. Oh. All right, welcome to BCST 1101, Media Technology Fundamentals. So this is kind of the science course for this program. Today, you probably saw a flash of the earlier presentation. I'll give you a little glossary of electricity just to kind of get your feet wet. We'll talk a little bit about static depending on time. We might get into electricity and then go from there. It starts off really basic. So the course, there's two modules. There's this term and next term. This term we start off really basic, electricity, photons, sound. We talk about psychology a little bit because, of course, as you may or may not understand, video is an illusion. It's not actually moving pictures, but your brain makes it look like moving pictures. So we talk a bit about that. And then starting next term, we get into some of the other technologies like codecs and optics and the hardware. And so once you understand how it all works with you, although there's a bit of that this term, but we're trying to get the groundwork laid that you understand how it works, how things affect you. The idea being that we all make magic in this business. We try to fool the audience. If you think that every single production you make, no matter what the topic, it's an illusion, right? So when you do an interview with somebody, the audience isn't in the room, but you position the camera so that they're looking at the subject as if they were there, right? You frame people in certain frames. You make certain edits in certain videos to make sure that people think they're natural. You turn your head in a room, you go from seeing people to seeing a door. So when you do an edit and you go from people to a door, you can infer, because you're conditioned, that that was a head turn, because you saw that door earlier, it's over there. Right? So we talk about all that so we can then build a better illusion, do a better magic show, if you will, because it, as I say, is a bit of magic. And so people, some people would argue that things like documentaries or stuff, well, no, they're not illusions. They totally are, right? I mean, if you think about it, if you're in some African, veldt and they're out there and there's all these animals at the watering trough, if you just for an instant put yourself in the position of the animal and look up, what do you see? You see three people across the water. Well, that's not natural. There isn't normally a film crew standing there, right? You're observing nature, but as people in physics will tell you, but observations will actually change the reaction, right? Animals won't react, and people who do these things understand they have to behave certain ways to appear to be natural. So everything you put up on video is an illusion, to one degree or another. Even the fundamental of the actual video. So that's my point. Like actually seeing pictures move is not happening. Like you're not seeing moving pictures. It is impossible to see moving images on a screen. What you see instead is a whole series of still images your brain stitches together because we're conditioned to see constant motion. So when we see something that looks close to constant motion, our brain goes, oh, okay, constant motion, happy, done, right? When it doesn't work, that's when people get confused. When you see movies where there's really artistic stuff going on, or there's all kinds of weird playing with time and speed, like speed ramping and stuff, it can break your brain. But of course, remember that if you think back to The Matrix, and it's on my mind because they announced a new one. Anyway, 20 odd years ago, the idea of speed ramping in a film, it wasn't new. We've been doing speed ramping for about 10 or 15 years before that, but it was kind of used sparingly. It wasn't really a cinematic effect until the technology caught up to make it more convenient. But nonetheless, at that time, it was quite disconcerting for people. Like anyone who's seen The Matrix, I don't want to give it too much away, but there's that rooftop scene where he bends backwards and suddenly everything slows down. You see all these multiple images. People are like in the theater go, oh, what's that? Now it's like, come on, where is it? Like you see somebody go for a punch in a superhero film, and you expect as soon as the punch starts, that's all going to slow down, including that bass note that starts dropping, ooh, as they go for the punch, because you're expecting that ramp. Because now you're conditioned to it, right? It's all about conditioning. It's when it's unexpected. And so new special effects come along all the time, and you start seeing, oh, that's really cool. And then in a couple of years, oh yeah, where's that? I want to see, something else. So it is all an illusion. Good morning. Good morning. Come on in. So no attendance today. As you can tell, we're already late. I don't like to be late, but we're late today because I'd underestimated how much time this was going to take. I was here early and it still didn't work. So that's a lesson, an object lesson to itself. It's nothing to do with today's lesson, but everything in this business takes longer than you think. You know, there's this idea, and again, Hollywood tends to popularize this. You'll see a lot of scenes in movies where, especially where there's a news crew involved, they'll grab a camera out of a van, up on the shoulder, and they start running, and the thing's rolling, and suddenly you're in the viewfinder. Again, that's impossible, right? But you're looking through the viewfinder, and you're seeing the footage, and the little red lights blinking in the corner. Well, no, it takes way longer than that to get going, right? So keep that in mind too, and that'll be drilled in your heads by a number of other instructors, not just me. But we all fall into the trap because we're human, and I've been doing this for a long time. You still underestimate. Oh, it'll be easy. All I have to do is hook up a camera, get a wireless microphone, and start. And, oh, wait a minute, camera doesn't work, cable's not the right size, don't have any batteries. Pretty soon, it's a big deal. Okay, so here's the outline. I don't expect you to read it all right now. Again, because I'm recording this lecture, I want to make sure the slides sync with the chatter, so when anyone's viewing this afterwards, they see it. I don't normally record lectures, by the way, although for the last, year and a half, they've all been recorded. This is the first time I've been back in a classroom since a while, so if I'm a little rusty, my apologies. But this is kind of what we're going to do. I'll give you the quick rundown, talk about myself, talk a little bit about the course, the program. You know, one of my things I like to say is making experts, right? And that's what your job is to become an expert at this. Now, there's a difference between knowing and thinking you know. And the danger in this business, again, is thinking you know, opening your mouth, saying something, promising something, committing to something, and then you can't deliver, right? So we try to get to the point where you can open your mouth with some confidence and learn to promise what you can deliver, right? It's always, always under promise, over deliver. Now, if you're a people pleaser, and I say that as somebody who was one of those people myself for a while, you want to overpromise. Oh yeah, no, whatever. You just tell me what you want, load it up on a sponge, I'll get it all done, we'll be fine. And then the person leaves and you explode, or you melt, or the whole thing falls apart, right? We can't do that in this business. We have to do the opposite. You take the more pragmatic approach and go, let's see what you need, let's analyze what you need. Sure. So the first thing you do is you assure the person, yeah, we can do this. But then the second question is we negotiate about how, so that you don't pay that personal price. Because it's all too easy for someone to unload what they need onto you, and you just soak it up and then unravel, right? And that's not just about video, that's about life in general. Because lots of people, a friend of mine told me years and years ago, lots of people want to put a monkey on your back, and you have to carry that monkey around. So your job is to not take the monkey, right? But still make the friend happy. There's ways to do it. So, because otherwise you end up with a bunch of monkeys on your back, and pretty soon, you know, they're tearing your ears off and trying to stick a banana up your nose. So there you go. Okay, so what can we do with our skills? There's plenty, as you probably know, there's plenty of avenues in this business. And when I say this business, it's 40 years ago, that was pretty straightforward. There were two businesses. There was film and there was television. And they didn't really, you know, they didn't even have at the same lunch counter. They would do totally different things. Now, there's a multitude of businesses. So when I say this business, I mean basically anything where you're making video and you're getting paid for it. Right? So that's this business. What can you do with your skills? You can direct, you can write, you can become a person who just hangs lights. I mean, there are people who are, you know, grips and gaffers all their career, and they're really good at it, right? The fact you can go up and down a ladder without getting sick. Some of you are going to have a problem going up on these ladders, right? And you have to do it quickly with like a 40-pound light fixture in your hand, in one hand. Now, there's ways to do that, right? But nonetheless, some people get halfway up the ladder, like the ladder starts shaking because they're shaking. Ladders don't shake on their own, right? And then they're out. That's it. They can't do this. I'm going to be an audio person, right? But so there's audio, there's editing, there's on and on and on. So what I try to do in this course is get you some of the foundations to cover all those things. So if some of the things aren't your interest. Now, the one thing we don't talk about in here is how to direct. Other than that, otherwise, well, I shouldn't say otherwise. But we do talk about how the illusion works. So if you want to become a director, learning how the illusion works, people always say to me, well, I want to direct, why am I learning this stuff? Well, because you have to know the tools. You cannot depend on your crew to tell you everything. You depend on them for their expertise. Goes back to my point about being an expert. But you can't expect everything to come from them. You've got to know some of it yourself, right? The worst directors are the ones who come in and say, do a bunch of stuff, show me what you have, and then they sort of do the buffet and pick. And in the meantime, the crew's going crazy, right? A good director comes in, knows what they want, knows what can be done, right? Good directors are often good cinematographers. They know how framing works, they know how cameras work, all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of things you can do with your skills. And even if you're not going to go into standard presentation, of course, there's YouTube, there's marketing, there's on and on and on. It all comes together. All right. Am I in the right class? We did that already, so hopefully we're all still here. It's theory mainly. The course is always in development. It changes again this year, from last year, from the year before, because the industry is always moving. Right? So for example, they're using DSLR cameras in live sporting events. Now for some of you, you're just tuned out because you don't care about live sporting events, but for other people, they're going, oh really? I've got a DSLR. And they're doing that because they have short focal planes. And that may not make sense right now, but a quick thumbnail is that a regular broadcast camera can shoot from here to the end of a football field and everything's in focus. That's how they're designed. Huge pieces of glass, lots of light coming in, blah, 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 designed to do that, right? Because you're following the action in a big area. But DSLRs are designed to focus to a fixed distance. So from here to 6 feet out or 6 meters out or whatever. And that's it. Everything in front and behind is out of focus. Well, suddenly, I don't know why, we don't know where it started, but about a year or two ago, some director thought, that's great. We can have a football player who's just scored a touchdown walking off the field and all that's in focus is that person. Now, we can't do that with our regular cameras. They won't do that. But we can do it with a DSLR on a stick. So I think it's called a Megalodon in one of the stadiums. And this operator runs around with a camera on a stick. The stick is for stabilization, by the way, in case you're wondering, because they're running, right? And they stop and they get a frame and we get short depth of field. So that is a new thing that we now have to talk about, that 2 years ago I didn't have to talk about. I mean, I talked about depth of field and stuff as an optical effect, but now we can talk about it as an application. When can you use it? When can you mix short depth of field with long depth of field? So you're part of the development. I always look to you guys for relevance and guidance because you're the ones going up and I'm the one sort of here or past here if you want. That meaning that I'm not looking constantly for new things to apply to my actual day-to-day video making. I'm looking for things to apply to instruction. So if you see things that are happening, we'll try to explain it if we can. Or I will, or you will, to me. Who am I? Who am I to tell you this? So I don't know where I found this phrase. That for a while I claimed it as my own, but it's probably not. I'm sure I found it somewhere on Google. But I try to stay on top of technology because otherwise it's just history. When I started here 10 years ago this week, we were talking about 1950s television technology. And we actually had television sets in this room in the corner that I would point to all the time and say, well, that would happen over there 20 years ago. And I quickly realized that you're all sitting there going, well, not you, but the 10-year older versions of you are going, what? So we try to stay away from too much looking backwards. Because unless we're looking backwards at stuff that's currently in use, and there are technologies that are old, such as microwave technology, that we're still using, it's relevant. Otherwise, like, why bother? So let's stay on top of it, right? So how did I get here, you're asking yourself? Well, I started as an audio person. If you want to really go back, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I found, I don't know where, I think it might have been in a secondhand shop, an intercom for a house. It was a little box, and you ran a wire to another box. And I put the box up in my bedroom, and I had another wire downstairs, and I would do radio shows. Now, this is really embarrassing to mention as a fellow this age, but nonetheless, as an 8-year-old, I thought I could be a DJ, radio announcer, right? So that kind of got me interested when I went to school. And I went to school as an English major in high school. I took all the English elective classes because, guy, you think they're easier, you can always teach. And then you get to grade 11 or 12, you start talking to the guidance counselor, and they're going, well, 85% of people who get teaching degrees are unemployed. And I'm like, well, that's not good. So I decided I would switch gears and take science, physics, chemistry. So I went to Langara because I was going to come out of high school without a lot of science. And of course, you can't go to UBC and stuff like that, or whatever university with science without science, right? So I thought I'll go to Langara because it's cheap. It was a 2-year program. I'll go there, take my sciences, get my foundation going. I was there a year, discovered they had a college radio station, and that was trouble. Then all of a sudden, academic stuff goes this way, and now I'm in the college radio station. So then I got a job. I volunteered there. I got a job in a music, well, I call it a music store. It's actually an equipment store, speakers, amplifiers for live performances. Worked on some questionable gigs as an operator, sold some stuff, met some people who were 70s famous at the time. You know, they did the local club circuit. I don't know what's going on right now in the local scene, but back then there was a club circuit. There was a handful of, a dozen or more nightclubs around town, and bands would just go, basically you'd start at the one end of town and drive all the way across. And by the end of the month, they'd have done all the clubs, and then they go to Burnaby and off to Surrey, the Dell Hotel, and you know, places that probably don't exist anymore. So there was a bit of a ecosystem. So you get to meet all these people. Some of them went on to become, you know, David Foster and people like that. And others just are now, well, one of them is actually a lawyer, maritime lawyer in North Vancouver. So anyway, long story short, because it's getting long, radio was not doing very well. I'm thinking, oh, you know, I've got this audio thing in my head. I'm still going to go into radio. So I started looking for jobs in commercial radio. In Vancouver at the time, radio was going towards automation. So they went from what was a 3-person show, so you'd have an operator, you have an announcer, and you'd have an assistant, to a 1-person show. Operator, announcer, 1 person, and an office person who was kind of looking after all the people on the air at the time. Long story again, jobs are disappearing. So got referred to CBC. Someone said, well, CBC is the biggest radio station in the city personnel-wise. Go check with them. I go to CBC. They tell me, hey, we don't have anything. Radio's in trouble. So why don't you go talk to television? And so I did. And the rest is history. I became a technician in television. I ran movies at night, film, actual acetate, not acetate. Yeah, is it acetate? No. No, it's acetate. Yeah, actual acetate film. I think of the old nitrate stock. I'm sorry, I got confused. I went back to the 1930s for a second. Acetate film stock, and ran the movies. Then became an editor. Started working in the tape room, which is a room full of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment that now fits here for $1,200. Went into news as a technician, technical supervisor. Finally became management of post-production. 16 years doing that, editing, audio, And then here I am, BCIT. So here's all the pictures for that stuff. Here's I used to sell these. I used to work on these when, you know, the K-Tels and the first wave of punk in Vancouver, 1977, Japanese Hall, some of these, the Smiling Buddha, some of these sort of storied places that were super rough. The funny thing is that most of these people were well-educated, middle-class white kids, and they loved slumming down the downtown east side and getting the crap beaten out of themselves, which I thought was odd, being not that way inclined. See, I was in the crew, so we didn't get beat up, but the band was always picking fights with people in the crowd. It was a very weird time. It sort of came around again. I think in the States they got into it a little bit later, so the Green Day, Blink-182, that kind of second wave of punk, and then I think we're back at it again where people are picking fights with the audience, so who knows. The college radio station, there's my ID badge from way back when. Started in film, ended in post. I forgot I had all these pictures of this. Became a post manager for 16 years. Post, yes, graphics, editing. Sound mixing, also called sweetening. It's called sweetening because the natural sound should be enough, but no, just use a little bit more, a little bit of sugar on that and make it sound better, right? So they call it sweetening. Visual effects. After CBC, I did do some freelancing. And what I discovered was I was in my, what was I then, 50s? Competing with 17, 18-year-old nephews who could do it in the basement for $300. So a famous story, we put a bid, famous to me, we put a bid on a mining company video with a helicopter shot over the mines up in northern BC, and quoted it at about $15,000, renting the copter and all those kind of cameras. And they came back and said, well, I can get someone to do it for $3,000. We can't even get a helicopter for $3,000. How'd they do? Well, they're just going to go overhead in an airplane, some trip they're going to take, and okay, well, shoot out the window, right? So you get what you pay for, right? But it became pretty obvious that people kind of wanted that. They wanted just cheaper and cheaper. So that wasn't helping. It's going the other way again, which is nice. It does go on cycles, just as you know, the industry does, rise and fall. Right now, the film business is going fantastically in this town. It has dipped before. It will dip again, so time your ride. So we've talked about me. What's the point of learning this stuff? It's the basis for all electronic media. Right? All the stuff we're going to talk about is the foundation for all of this electronic media we do. The basis for technology is science. which requires, and I put this slide up here because there is some simple arithmetic. There is math. So every year I get students who shudder at the thought of having to do math. But there's math. We have to do math. We have to calculate angles for framing. We have to talk about light levels. We have to talk about audio levels. So there's going to be addition, subtraction. Well, there's no algebra. Well, there is some. We talk about the inverse square rule, where twice the distance is 1/4 of the intensity of the radiated power source, that kind of stuff. So there is a little bit of x, fill in the x. That's about it. There's no calculus. Well, I guess there is calculus. We talk about codex and discrete cosine transforms using fast Fourier analysis, but that's probably it then, right? Yeah. There's a bit of math. So don't worry. None of it's going to be sprung on you. It'll all be just there, laying in the weeds. So again, back to my point, because experts, right? You want to know the basis of what you're talking about. You don't want to be guessing when you're doing this thing. One of the challenges is people feel that creativity sometimes comes from spontaneity. It's sort of an artistic mentality that, well, if I just, the classic is, you hear about the classical Roman and Italian, sculptors who would say things like, how do you see the statue in there? Well, I just look at the stone and I see it in the stone. There's this idea that this sort of jumps out of your head. And that is true. There is some spontaneity and creativity, but in the execution, you pretty much have to be organized. In order for that spontaneous creation to appear in the marble, nobody mentions the chisels have to be sharp. They have to be the right size. It has to be the right weight of the hammer. The marble has to be checked out that it's not going to crack when you hit it. All kinds of stuff. So there are technical aspects that, again, popular storytelling, it's very, what's the word I want to use? It's comforting, I suppose, is not the right word, but it's comforting to know or think that creativity just springs. I'm having a block, I can't figure it out, it'll just come to me. That's true, but then the execution, right? Like, yeah, you've got a great idea, but if you can't spell, no one will understand it, right? So we are the kind of people who get the letters in the right order, so to speak. Logic is another thing. You will panic here. We will put you in positions of panic. Not intentionally necessarily, but sometimes intentionally. The trick is to not panic, right? Every crisis that starts with a panic usually doesn't end well. So one of the things we do with giving the foundations, again, if you understand how things are built, how the electrons interact, where that hum's coming from in the audio. Hum means there's loose electrons somewhere in the room, which means there's something in the room that's giving off that's not you. So one by one, you go around and start looking at things. Oh, turn everything off one at a time, and the hum goes away. Click. That was it, right? So we teach you that kind of methodical, not mythological, methodical method of thinking. So logic is going to get you out of trouble a lot of the time. And the trick with this business is there's a lot of time pressure, right? There's an old saying that if you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you're fired. Sorry, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. If you're late, you're fired. And it's true in this business more than almost any other. You always want to get here early. I'm a living example of that this very morning. I got here half an hour before class and probably spent 20 minutes just getting my stuff in here before I could actually start. Again, I underestimated how long it would take just to get the stuff from the room to here, right? And then 10 minutes after that, you were here. Now, if this was a television or live production, a live stream, at 8:30 the stream goes up. Here I am. Oh, sorry, everybody, I'm still pulling stuff. No, you can't do that, right? So there's going to be time pressure, which is going to push you to panic. And what you can't do is let that happen. You have to just back off. Doesn't mean freeze, because that's another human reaction. You start to panic, you just wait it out, and it'll go away. We will try and teach you the ways to get out of that, all right? So use logic. The other thing is the scientific method that we're going to try and get through to you is that television is an experiment, video and film is an experiment. You never know what's going to catch, right? Like the classic story of Seinfeld, it went almost 2 seasons before anybody even liked it. Now, somebody decided to keep that experiment going until someone liked it. Those are the old days. That's like the 1990s. That doesn't happen anymore. You basically get 1 or 2 shows. I mean, how many people have watched a show where after 2 episodes it's canceled? Or they do 3 or 4 episodes and it's over? Well, because they don't give that time anymore, which is a problem, because creativity does need to develop. But you have to be able to reproduce the same outcome over and over again. Once you find a successful formula, once you find a successful method, once you find a successful way to edit, you want to apply that every single time. It's like a baseball swing, right? Or a slap shot in hockey, or any sporting event where you've got to hit the object the right way to get it to go to the same place every time. You know, tennis players are so successful because they can put that ball anywhere on the court. Right? They can run around and just, I want the ball over there. They're over here, the ball's going over there, and they can make that happen. So you have to be able to learn the same things in this business, right? Is to find a successful thing and then do it again. Because it's very easy to make, you know, really great pancakes, and then you try the second time and they just turn into flat, rubbery crepes. What happened? Oh, I forgot to add the baking powder, or I forgot to, you know, same is true here. You do something and then suddenly you're editing and I've lost all my footage. Oh my God, what's happened? You've forgotten how you organized it the last time, right? So you've just get into trouble. So we try to get you to think in a sort of a scientific method. So what are the steps to that in the media? See the situation, be aware, make notes. The number one thing that happens in this business is you get told something and they never get told it again. But then you're expected to remember it. Now that's not a school thing, because I'm sure you're used to that with school. Where school is bad is that it gives you all these guidelines and helpers along the way. So for example, I'll tell you something. You'll have the slides up on the Learning Hub. You'll get a quiz to reinforce it in your head. So you'll have repeated 2 or 3 times. Well, that doesn't happen in the industry. Somebody says, get me a crescent wrench. Give me an 8-inch crescent wrench. And they disappear. And you're halfway there, someone stops you to ask you a question, and you're like, wait a minute, where was I going again? What did I need to get? There's nobody to ask. And if you ask someone else, they go, I don't know what they wanted. So you've got to remember and keep on top of stuff, because it'll start to snowball. More and more requests will start coming in if you haven't, you know, made notes. So make notes, figure out what's going on, use your head, don't let your emotions take over. It's so easy to stop thinking when your heart takes over, right? Anybody who's been in a situation of fright, you realize sometimes you don't even remember what happened. You were there, and the next thing you were steps away from there, because your emotions take over, you get the fight or flight syndrome, and off you go. Again, you have to sort of stay logical, right? It's harder here because depending on what you're creating, you're often putting yourself into it. So you feel emotionally connected to what you've just handed in. You make a video, for example, you do a video about some personal life event of your own, and it has real meaning to you, and you give it to someone else, and they look at it, and you're not thinking anymore. You're kind of hoping and waiting and wondering, how are they going to think about and they tell you something, and you're like, out of your head, because you're not, right? You get too engaged. So you have to be able to step back. Not easy, right? Always get feedback on your work. Ask anybody and everybody. You know, as long as you trust their opinion. Don't ask complete strangers if you don't trust them. But having said that, you will get criticized by complete strangers at some point in your career a number of times. You'll hand something in, you'll get a note back from the office of whoever, and they'll say, oh, you know, Jane in Saskatchewan didn't like it. Who's Jane? Why didn't you like it? I don't know. She doesn't like it, so we want you to do it again. What? Right? So, and that happens. That kind of thing happens. So, blah, 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 big long slide, deductive reasoning. Just imagine that if A, then B. If this is true, like that audio example I gave you, if you turn that thing off and the hum goes away, that was the problem. I often see people trying things like they'll turn a bunch of stuff off at once, or they'll go around the room turning everything off and keep going. The hum's gone, and then they're like, oh, it stopped. Now, which one of these things was it again? They start turning stuff back on. You just have to be a bit like Sherlock Holmes, a bit of deduction. What happened? What changed? What's different? On and off. There we are, right? It'll get you a long way. What do employers want? This is where I start talking from my experience as an employer, as opposed to the curriculum of the course. What they want is knowledge and skills, but what they really want is attitude, right? The worst thing you can say to somebody, I put smarts. That used to be a term. The worst thing you can say to someone is, I'll do anything. What are you good at? Oh, what do you need? No. I'll tell you right now, as an employer, the reason I'm talking to you about what do I need is because I have a problem. So your job is to find out what my problem is. Now, I might not even know what my problem is. So-and-so's quit. Oh, okay, I need a person. That's a really fundamental question. But you need to find out what kind of person do I need, and can you be that person? If you can't, don't, as they used to say in the old days, write a check with your mouth that you can't cash. Right? Don't say something you can't commit to. Because oftentimes, again, that happens. You get in, and then you realize, oh my God, I can't do this. Well, now you've buggered yourself up in a couple of ways. You've committed to something you can't do, and now you look bad because you don't look like you understand what even your skills are, right? So be aware, try to focus. I know it's so hard because you'll have I'll guarantee you, a couple of my colleagues will tell you the exact opposite. Oh yeah, whatever you do, just say you'll do anything. Do whatever they'll give you to do. That's not quite the same thing. You still have to know in your head what you're good at, right? So start with that. So I guess what I'm saying is don't exclude doing everything, but lead with, hey, I'm really good with cameras. I've done some audio, but I will do accounting, I will do, right? But don't just say whatever, because the moment you leave it open, now they're going to pick. You've handed the power back to the other person, they're going to pick for you. Oh, well, in that case, why don't you come and wash the van? No, I didn't want to do that. Well, but you said anything. So just be careful. But as I say, you will hear contradictions from my colleagues. I've heard them say it out loud, that, oh, well, you do whatever they give you, just take any job. Yes, but make sure, so to the take any job question, I always say to people, as long as there's something in it for you. If you're getting paid, if you're getting some certain specific experience, if that's a person you want to work with, then take the job. If you're taking the job just to look busy or do something, maybe that's not a good reason to take the job, right? I know finance is often ruled job taking, and I've been in jobs where I hated what I was doing, but I got paid, right? So then you have to remember, at least I'm getting paid, right? But you're going to get, at your stage, you're going to get a lot of jobs where it's work with a friend, you're not getting paid. My favorite is experience. Oh, just do it for the experience, right? Oh, so you get a little experience card I can tap at Tim Hortons for coffee? Oh, no. Well, then what's the experience good for? Well, you can tell other people you work with me. Okay, who are you again? Because that happens. People will puff themselves up, tell you you're going to get experience with me. You'll go tell someone else, hey, I'm working with so-and-so. Oh, that guy, he never pays anybody. Oh, well, so he's got another one, right? So be careful, that's all I'm saying. How do you pass the course? Really straightforward. It's a theory course. Just tell me what I told you. There's nothing else to it, right? There's no creative aspect to that. Just there's going to be material, there's going to be quizzes. There's a quiz up right now, which I don't think is open yet. We'll talk about it when we do the lesson, and that's it. There'll be a quiz every week. Now, in the before times, they were paper quizzes in class. During the interregnum year, I was doing them online with online Learning Hub quizzes. So I'm going to try that with you guys and see how that goes. The downside, from a very pragmatic instructor point of view, is I have no idea that you guys actually know any of this stuff if you're doing it online. I have no idea how you're answering the questions. At least what you hear in the room doing the quizzes on paper, I have a rough idea that it's coming out of your head. So I trust that we'll give it a try and see how it goes. So here we are. And some of you are like, great, it doesn't matter, I don't care, as long as I pass, I'm out. Fair enough. For the people who just want to get out of here with a high mark, more power to you. I hope you learn something. If you don't, well, other people in the room remember who they are because you'll have to work with them one day. This is, the speech about this is your job interview has just begun. You probably had this last week from some other instructors. It's so true that you will work with someone in this room, not just in the next 2 years, but perhaps for the rest of your career. You'll interact with each other, right? And this will be your bond that you were in that class, right, or in that year. So you might start using that as a connection to get together. So you'll start to, if you don't play nice. So, and I'm off in the forest. So one thing I do, and you'll learn this, and you at home will learn this as well, is that I often walk off into the woods in a conversation, as I call it, and sometimes I need to get a GPS to get me back on track. Occasionally a student's hand will go up and remind me, oh yes, we're talking about photons, we're not talking about philosophy, although you can actually connect those two, but anyway, let's not go down there. But nonetheless, the career path, the job interview, it all starts here. Now, for those of you that want to abandon that, that's fine. Some people get out of here and after the end of 2 years they become a pharmacist. Great. But who makes videos for the pharmacy a couple of years down the road. So you will work with each other. And what I'm saying to the people who think they can sort of skate is that you might skate, you might pass, that might be all you care about. But the people who you work with may never work with you again, right? So don't dynamite yourself too soon. I guess that's my real point. If you're going to dynamite yourself, try to do it for a year and a half, and then near the second part of the last term, maybe you can blow yourself up. In the meantime, everyone else is, move forward. Because there's going to be situations where you're in teams and you depend on each other, right? So it doesn't mean you have to like each other. It doesn't mean you have to all be nicey and, sort of kumbaya about it, but it does mean that this is how this business is, right? Being crammed together in teams is BCIT's motto, and that's how the business is as well. If there are people who think, I don't need to work in a team, I'm just going to be a documentary filmmaker. Okay, which means you're going to be the camera operator, the editor, and the person with the camera. Are you going to sell the film? Are you going to mount the film in a theater? Are you going to put it into a competition? Are you going to run the competition? You can't do it all yourself. You can do some of it yourself, but at some point you have to hand it off to somebody else. And at that handoff point, that's when your social skills come in, right? So be forward, be bright, don't be a dick. I guess that's the best way to put it. And things will go better. Don't be a pushover. There's something else in this business. There's a lot of strong personalities. One thing you'll find, by the way, who wants to direct in here? 1, 2, 3, yeah, see? So there's already a bunch of type A people who want to drive the bus. There's only one steering wheel in the bus, but everybody wants to drive. So you got to be careful you don't let yourself get pushed over, right? I'm okay, don't worry about me, whatever you think. That only lasts for a while, because what happens after a while, you start to resent that. The other people just think, oh great, I can always ask person X because they're just going to do whatever I ask them to, but you start to hate it. And then you don't think you should be doing it, then you get bitter. Don't do that. Don't let that happen to yourself, because it does. It can. Okay, safety. I'm off the forest, back on the highway. Rule 1, heads up. Oh, this is just a general reminder everywhere. And of course, with the COVID, we're all pretty aware now of health safety, but there's other things, ladder safety and all that kind of stuff. Electrical safety, yes. Sure. One trick with this business is don't come into a room, don't walk across anything, don't go behind a curtain until you know what's there. So one thing we all have, or a lot of us have, is a flashlight, right? So when you're going behind a curtain, turn on the flashlight, watch where you're going, because there's going to be cables, there'll be boxes. There's stuff intentionally painted black so it doesn't show up on camera that'll be hidden behind a black curtain in a dark room, right? And you will walk over it. So, and this is not just at school, this is all over the industry. There's stuff, you can see there's bright colored tape on the floor, and in some sets you'll have that for things like that are really dangerous. But once you get into the working part of the set, all that stuff's dark. It all looks natural. It's all hidden with black tape. So it's just a note to be careful and be safe. Yeah.
I think your flashlight is still on.
Oh, yes it is. Thank you very much. Why not a phone? Anybody know? Those are good points that I hadn't even considered, but thank you very much. No, you know why? Because you can't put a phone in your teeth. And you're going to often find yourself, I can't do it with my mask on, but you'll find yourself holding this in your teeth with your hands free, unless you've got a headband light, like a headlamp. There's a lot of situations where you need both your hands, and now you've got the phone in one hand. So then what happens? Well, then a friend comes over and puts a phone over behind you, right? Well, now you've got two people doing the job that one person could do with their flashlight in their teeth. So I'm just saying, this is not like any kind of hard and fast rule, but it shows that you're able to be independent, that you don't need someone else to hold a flashlight for you. You can get the job done on your own, right? Because if you're behind, if someone says, hey, can you go fix that, and you're back there with the flashlight in your teeth, and it's fixed, great. If you go back, then all of a sudden this voice from behind goes, hey, someone else can hold a flashlight for me? Now the person in front's like, well, now I need this person. Now that person's back there. Now we've got 2 people, 3 people, right? So it's just a little indicator of being self-sufficient, right? You can get these at the dollar store. This one isn't a dollar store one. This is a billet aluminum everyday carry type flashlight, but you can get them at the dollar store for like $3-4. Little tiny flashlight, button on the end, right? I'd recommend wrapping it with some tape, something tasty, strawberry flavored maybe, because you're gonna have it in your mouth occasionally. I know that sounds gross. Oh yeah, ask. Number 2, ask. Always ask. If you're not sure, ask. And at your stage of the game, you get the luxury of asking as many times as you want. At the end of 2 years, people get tired of you asking, but you should still ask. It never hurts to ask. And one of the things that's important, even without safety, a lot of times the people who you're working with don't know what they want, and they can't express it to you. Right? The hardest thing to do is tell someone what you're seeing in your head. It helps if you can ask, because you can ask it in your frame of reference. So if someone says, I want blue sky, you can say, do you mean like North Shore Mountains blue sky? Do you mean like Hawaii blue sky? Because now you've got images in your own head what that means. And they're like, oh yeah, Hawaii, yeah, great, thanks. You can communicate if you ask, right? If you just expect them to have all the ideas and all the language, they may not. Okay. Speed, time, precision, blah, 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 but basically remember that we work in the time between seconds. We're constantly working in frames, 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second. That's 1/30th, 1/60th of a second. So I'm not kidding, we are working in that kind of precision, right? So get used to that idea that you're going to start working in much smaller regular sections of time. What kind of happens, if you do, especially do a lot of live stuff to the clock, you'll start to find that seconds run slower. It's really weird. It happened to me years ago when I started having to count down and do stuff like that. You start to realize that there's actually the next second hasn't happened yet. You're watching the hand on the clock. And think, wow, it's... But when you're not watching it, all of a sudden it's whizzing around, right? So it is kind of a weird illusion. There's actually a video on that by Vsauce. It's quite interesting. Yeah, this gets a bit... In the end, what are we learning? It's not the little... Okay, so we learned it's not the problems that matter, it's the speed of the solution that matters. Right? It goes back to my why am I hiring somebody? Because I want a solution. Don't worry about the problem. Don't get fixated on the problem. There is a problem, yes. What's the solution? The first thing out of your mind should be what's happening here, and then what can I do about it? Not just, it's broken. Yeah, great. Because I'll tell you, you take a cable in to be repaired and say it doesn't work. Well, what do you mean? What doesn't work? Now, to you, that's enough. It doesn't work. It's supposed to work, now it doesn't work. They want to know why doesn't it work? Oh, they'll look at the cable, look, this end's coming off, or I can see a piece of wire coming out the other end. I think it's frayed. I think it's, now we're getting to the solution, right? So that's the kind of way you have to think. So that's that. Questions, comments? That was wordier than I thought it would be. Sorry for going so long. Hands? Anything at all? Day one-ish? Day what? Day two? Whatever this is for you guys? What day is this for you guys? Oh, gang sign, nice. Day two? Okay. I ask what day does I get gang signs? All right. Okay. Now we're going to try, the other part of this AV presentation is sound. I got sound there. Okay, so I want to show you, come on. There we go. I'll show you this as an example of the kinds of things that we do. So anyone who's seen the Mission Impossible movies, knows they're pretty amazing because a lot of those effects are practical. There's very little green screen going on. There's some. But there's not as much green screen going on as you would think. And here's an example of Tom Cruise doing a video in Paris in the street. Now, the trick is, the illusion is, these cars aren't all just civilians in Paris. Like, people aren't just going to around their normal business in Paris, and this motorcycle, which you'll see in a minute, appears in traffic. These are all trained stunt drivers, okay? Just keep that in mind. Oh. Wait. I see where the speakers are going. Hang on. It's not going in there. Let's try that. I got to fix that.
That rig just didn't work. And we looked at Tom and said, what are we going to do? And he said, my friends, we got to roll. We got to go. We got to shoot. So he got on his bike and took off.
Okay, so lesson number one about the industry. What did Tom Cruise say? We can't wait around. We got people here. We got to get stuff done. So he recognized the problem, and we don't have what we need. We just stop. We won't do it today. Oh, no, that's going to be a very expensive day. So he figured out a way around it. Now, it's not the safest way, but nonetheless. I just want to go back. I don't know if you guys can hear that audio. I don't know why it's not coming through here. Momentito for... Yeah, it's not coming through here. That's why, isn't it? Oh, it should be. Weird. Moment, hang on a sec. Oh, I know why. It's the Mac. Yeah, I forgot about this. See? Get away from it for a while. So Apple tends to prioritize the HDMI output. So now, pardon me here.
Could have beaten the last stunts, but he did.
I pitched Tom for the helicopter long line drop, and Tom loved it.
Well, obviously you could do that on a green screen, but of course, Mission Impossible fashion, we flew and dropped Tom Cruise off of it.
I remember it was freezing. My hands were numb. I have to try to climb as fast as I can.
Okay. That doesn't sound as good. Maybe it does. Hang on. Needs a bit of treble.
Up that rope, and then it's a free fall to the back.
Rebecca and I could see Tom dangling from this helicopter.
Okay, let's go back here.
Motorcycle chase in Paris was nerve-wracking. Being that Tom was riding a motorbike without a helmet.
had a safety rig for this one challenging shot. That rig just didn't work.
And we looked at Tom and said, what are we going to do? And he said,
My friend, we gotta roll. We gotta go. We gotta shoot.
so he got on his bike and took off. That's Tom riding the motorcycle against traffic around the Arc de Triomphe. The rooftop chase. He's leaping from one building to another, hitting the wall with his body and has to grab on.
You know, it's one of those things. I'm supposed to have that level of impact hitting the wall. I just put my foot out, tried to soften the impact. I knew
Anybody squeamish? You're about to see a broken limb.
instantly it was broken.
He knew, I have to finish this because we're not coming back, and pulled himself up to get the shot.
Tom will be the first actor to ever actually do a halo jump for real.
A halo jump is a high altitude, low opening.
There's a lot of risks in going to 25,000 feet. There's dangers of hypoxia and the bends.
The risk of a midair collision we were really concerned about. You're talking about Tom jumping out of a plane that's traveling at 165 miles an hour.
They're genuinely risking their lives to entertain people.
Okay, so I stop it here because everyone in the theater and at home on Netflix or whatever is watching this, and they look marveling at the shot. What are you thinking about? Exactly. How are they getting that shot? It's not green screen. We just proved that. But that means there's someone, he's looking at someone right now with a camera, and you saw the shot. If you looked, I'll show it earlier. If you look briefly here, you'll see that the person has it on their helmet. Oh, where are they? They're in the plane. Hang on.
Hypoxia and the bends.
The risk of a midair collision we were really concerned about. You're talking about Tom.
There. There's the camera. No viewfinder, right? You have to have your hands free to run your parachute rig. So now we're talking technology here. We're talking technique as well, because this camera operator has to hold their head in the right way. They must have something, I'm sure they must have something painted on their visor to give them an idea of where to aim. Someone's done some work to line up the helmet with something they can use, but, right? So this is where this course, this program will ruin movies for your friends. Because you'll sit there and go, well, that's impossible. How could they have done that? You know, like I go back to the original Spider-Man movie, and you watch the CGI Spider-Man whipping around New York, and it looks like one of those plastic koosh ball things on a string. He's flipping around the building. Nobody's limbs work that way. Well, but he's Spider-Man. No, but even if he's Spider-Man, he has to have bones, right? So people, shut up. Okay, it's a special effect. Be quiet, right? This is what you'll be doing. You'll be wondering. You'll look at this and go, how did they get
Jumping out of a plane.
Right? Look at that. I mean, they framed it. Someone choreographed it in such a way that they knew he had to be here. They had to jump at the same time to get that framing for this very next shot that's coming up. And they must have jumped dozens of times, right? But
It's traveling at 165 miles an hour.
They're genuinely risking their lives to entertain people, which is incredibly valiant and daft.
360 downward spiral.
I'm going to go back here to the
Dino.
So this is not to say, okay. This is not to say there's not some trickery, right? It is likely that this shot is a stunt person hitting the car. And we cut to Tom, because again, goes back to the illusion. You see someone who looks the same, about the same height, riding the same motorcycle. They hit a car. Because you've seen that it's Tom, or Ethan Hunt, or whatever you want to call him at this point.
The motorcycle against traffic
You've
around
seen those other shots. Your brain's put the pattern in your head, right? So your brain
the Arc de Triomphe.
Your brain finishes the thought. We don't see Tom hit the car face on. So we don't know it's Tom. Now, as film, television, video people, we think it probably isn't Tom because the insurance risk of him getting hit by the car is pretty high, right? But someone hit that car. It's not a green screen shot. And then they cut to Tom. Now, here's the other thing. We don't know, especially nowadays with things like morph edits and such, we don't know where in this sequence it becomes Tom. This could still be the stunt person, right? It could be the stunt person all the way to the foreground. It could be just Tom's face mapped on their head, right? We don't know any of that stuff. But the point is, if we suspend that like the rest of the audience does, we just say, Ethan Hunt / Tom Cruise hit a car and he survived. But we know, and as people want to reproduce these kinds of shots, you can't have a real person hit a real car and expect them to walk away from it. So you've got to build it another way. right? And that's when you start peeling it apart and saying, well, how do we get? Do we map Tom's face on their face? Is that actually Tom rolling? Like, is it the stunt person in the air? Stunt person, right? Stunt person, Tom. That's entirely possible as well. All of it without green screen, right? Just by morphing. The stunt person could have a green hoodie on, although I doubt they would because they need their visibility. The other thing is, of course, we don't know that's, let's take another layer. We don't know this isn't a green screen. They say that isn't. Maybe that, when they did the cut, they went to a green screen shot, right? So this is all the kind of stuff that we're trying to learn. We're trying to see the illusion. We're trying to go past the curtain. We're trying to be like magicians. So that you watch someone do a magic trick as an audience member, wow, that's great. They pulled a watch out of a rabbit's ear or something. Oh, that's pretty cool. But now you're being trained to figure out where'd that watch come from? Is that really a rabbit, right? Because you want to do the same trick, if not better. So that's what we're trying to teach you here, right? That's why I want to show you some of this stuff, because you can see that filmmakers play all kinds of tricks, and they play tricks with your expectations. Yes?
I just wanted to point out when or the stunt double or whoever hits the car, before he does a slight head turn over his shoulder, and whether that face is mapped on or
Right there, you mean?
if you go a few frames back, if you use the he just looks over his shoulder for a second before he hits the car, but it's in the same
The Arc de Triomphe.
Yeah.
to solidify the
Yep,
illusion.
exactly, exactly. So, it's entirely possible that you're right. They map somebody out. It's entirely possible. I mean, it's not outside the possibility it's Tom hitting the car, but it's unlikely, right? The same with the jump scene. If we look here, right? This is all him.
With his body, it has to grab on.
But what don't you see in this shot? You don't see any of the wires holding him up. He's totally suspended on wires because they're not idiots. If he misses that jump, he's dead. Right? This is a real building. So if he misses that jump, so they've got a wire rig over top, and they've matted it all out. So when I say there's no green screen, that doesn't mean there's no effect. Right? And that's one of those wriggly things that people will say, oh yeah, well, this is all practical effects. That is a practical jump. And what that means in our terminology is that's someone actually doing that actual jump. A practical thing in a film or television or video set is an actual thing that actually works. So a practical light is a light that not only lights the room, but it actually turns on and off in the shot. Right? A practical effect is one that's actually happening in real time, in real life. But the safety, he's on a harness, right? He didn't make the jump, and he broke his foot right there. And the hero, because Tom Cruise is the hero myth, the story is, of course, this is their last day in London. They had to get the shot. So he just, muscled up.
It's one of those things. I'm supposed to have that
right
level.
there. He puts his foot out, and if you look carefully, you can see the foot's bending in a direction that feet don't normally bend in. There's actually a close-up on another video that shows.
Of impact hitting the wall. I just put
There it is. Yeah,
my foot out, try to soften the impact.
right? Now, there's wire rigs all around. He's not going to fall, but he's committed to the act, right? That's the other thing. This is where actors come in handy, because they will commit to the part. They will do everything they can to make it work. And so he's completely pretending that if he lets go of that railing or that ridge of the building, he's down on the ground. He wouldn't be, but he's got to sell it to you, right? That's all part of that illusion. If he just sort of lazily flopped over there, then you think, oh, well, he's probably on a rig. But he sells it. It's all about fooling the audience. And what you want to learn to do is the same thing, right? At varying levels of foolishness. Anyway, so that's that. All right, put that down. Okay, so where else are we? Okay, so let's get to the lesson at hand. We'll start with this today. So there's a quiz. The quiz is going to be match the word to its definition. It's a matching quiz. There's 40 words. Each word's worth a point. No points, no penalty if you don't get there's each correct guess is worth a point. There's no mark off if you get one wrong. It's just 0. Some quizzes are set up so that if you get it wrong, it takes a mark away. It's just positive or nothing. So just don't worry about that. So you won't end up below 0. Okay. Wow, this has been a long time. Okay, so I'm going to scream by these pretty quickly. It's posted on the Learning Hub. Everyone can see the Learning Hub, right? We've already done that? Okay, good. The quiz will open today. It'll close tomorrow. We'll see how that goes. And if it doesn't work, email me and say, oh my God, you know, my cat ran over me in the car and I'm in hospital and I can't. So anyway, but that won't last forever. Just this is the first week, bit of the honeymoon week. So we'll just make sure everybody's comfortable. So alternating current. Electrical current that reverses directions at regular intervals. That's a regular power, right? And so all of this stuff we'll explain. Today isn't the day to learn these topics in depth. It's just the word list, just to sort of get the idea, get started. Don't feel badly. Like I said, there's 40 marks, one quiz. It's 1/10. It's less than 1/10 of the mark for the quizzes. So the actual mark per question is low. The stakes in this are pretty low. So don't worry if you get it right. It's not going to kill you or hurt you in any way. It's just getting used to the ideas and getting used to the mechanisms. Amps, the measurement of current flow. We'll be talking about amps. Atoms, I was curious about leaving this in here. Atoms are only because electrons are part of the atomic world, right? We used to talk a lot about atoms. We don't talk about them anymore. Battery, a single or group of cells. So when you have a battery, this is a battery, but also a Tesla has a battery. But the Tesla battery is full of hundreds of these, maybe thousands, no, hundreds of them, right? So understand the difference. A cell is one. A Tesla doesn't have a cell. It has hundreds of them. But those cells together make a battery, right? So it's a little confusing. But a battery can either be one or a bunch. Now, when I say a bunch, I don't mean a collection. Like if I had 10 of these in my hand, they wouldn't be one battery. They'd be 10 batteries. But if they were connected together in a lump with one wire coming out of them, that would be a battery. Okay? So they're wired together in a group. So it's a bit confusing. And one thing I should stop, and this is why I did this today too, this business is full of confusing and ambiguous language. And there's lots of words that have different meanings in different contexts. It's a bit like English, right? Flower, flower, and flower. What other language has that? You have the same word, this different spelling, same sound, means completely different things, completely unrelated things in some respects, right? The business, in our business, is the same kind of stuff goes on. Capacitor or condenser. So condenser, I mention that because microphones are often called condenser mics. Condenser is an old-timey, and I mean like 100-year-old-timey expression for a capacitor, but for some reason in the audio world, that term is hung on. It's about the only place you'll hear about condensers. Maybe automotive occasionally hear about a condenser in a car, but it really is a capacitor. But anyway, all it does is it's like a battery, but only temporarily. A charge. So a charge, and we'll talk about that when we talk about static, is just a bunch of electrons waiting for something to do. Right? They're grouped together. They're not doing anything. They're not electricity yet. They're just sort of hanging out. The door hasn't opened to the concert. They're just outside waiting to go in. Right? They're not moving through the doors yet. Once they start moving, they become electricity. They're just a charge. The circuit is the path. Electrons will follow. The conductor is the material they follow it through. And again, we'll go through all this in the course. This is just kind of a quick overview word list. And by the way, keep this word list. You can use it all term. It'll be handy as a point of reference. Current is the movement of electricity through the conductor. Remember I talked about a charge? That's the electron sitting waiting. Current is actually them on the move. Without current, nothing happens. A charge is only going to be useful if you can make it move. Static electricity, you build up a charge. When do you make it move? Usually when you don't want to. You touch the doorknob and zap, right? You get a shock. It's an unwanted charge. Lightning is a charge that we don't particularly like, but it's not current until it starts moving. And then the moment it stops moving, the instant it's over, which is usually instantaneous, it's no longer a current again. A direct current only flows in one direction, comes out of a battery, goes out one end and back in the other. So something you got to remember about the world of electricity is that it's ruled by the world of physics, and the world of physics likes everything to come to a rest, right? So you drop something, it wants to get to a point of low energy, so it falls, right? And that's electricity is the same. Electricity wants to get to a point where nothing's moving anymore. That's why it moves in the first place, because you've set up an imbalance, and then it wants to get back to balance. So it runs to the place where it thinks balance is. Sometimes that's you. If things aren't properly wired and shielded, you can become the conductor, right? We'll talk about that another time. Distribution or distro. So in distribution is just generic, like that panel in the corner, distribution, but in our business, distro is a term for any kind of box that has a bunch of wires that you can plug into. Like a power bar could be considered distro. Not very good distro. Distro is usually a fairly heavy-duty, industrial-grade power bar, sometimes a box the size of a garbage can with tons of outlets on it. Sometimes it involves a generator. And the lighting person, right, the gaffer is in charge of distributing electricity around the set, right, using the distro system. Electricity, flow of electrons. So as opposed to a charge, electron is the object that flows. They're negatively charged. Energy is the ability to do work. So there's no point in having electricity if you can't do something with it. And what we do with it is called energy. It's the ability to do work, right? Power, in the formula here, power is the work being done, just so you know the difference. So energy is sort of the ability to do work. Power is the work itself being done. So energy is expressed as power over time. The amount of work we can do in a certain, right? Because it's great to say we've got so many horsepower, but if it's not going anywhere, it's not energy yet. Question? No? Waving? Okay. Fuse, safety device that melts when it gets too hot. Generator, a machine which makes electrical energy out of mechanical energy. It does rotation, wind generators, hydroelectric generators, gasoline-powered, diesel-powered generators. They generally, because of the mechanics of our world, there's other ways to do it besides rotation, but we tend to like rotational methods because they're just easier to contain. You can do it with fusion reactions, but that tends to sometimes melt the neighborhood down if it doesn't go well. If a generator goes off center, it might vibrate a bit or it might come apart, but nothing serious. Ground. So the ground is the electrical connection to the earth. This is that part about the energy wanting to return to neutral. The earth is one giant neutral. So all electricity wants to eventually run down to the earth, literally the dirt, which is why it's called ground. And in fact, in Europe, in some countries, it's called earth. The British call it earth. I think the French call it earth as well, because they mean the actual dirt, right? And that's the energy. Well, even though it's all running around the wires and stuff, it wants to get back there. We stop it, right? We contain it in the wires and in the circuitry. If you expose that wire to the ground, it will run to the ground. If you touch the connection and make the connection to the ground, it will run through you, right? Because that's where it wants to go in the end. It wants to return to neutral. Nice. Grid. So two things a grid means. This is a grid. In a lighting terminology, it's any bunch of pipes and stuff in the ceiling you hang lights on. But the grid is also the power system for any major metropolitan area. It is not the distro. So when you're talking about a film set, you do not have a grid other than this to hang lights. You do distribution in a film set. The grid is hydro's, bigger picture. Speaking of hydro, what a segue. For people that aren't familiar with our weird Canadian use of the language, we're one of the few countries in the world that refer to electricity as hydro. It's the power company in some countries. In the United States, it's the power company, the electrical company, the power utility. But here in BC, Ontario, and Quebec, for sure, and I think in some of the maritime provinces, it's hydro. And that's because we use hydroelectric power generation. Water generates electricity. So you'll hear the term hydro. Now, if you go to Los Angeles and start working in the business down there and say, I'll have to give hydro a call, they're going to wonder what you're talking about. Who's hydro? What are they? Right? That's just our weirdness. I've run across many people, and there's videos about this too, about Canadian usage of the language. And for some reason, we've adopted hydro. So that's what it is. Insulator. Any material that will not allow electricity to flow through, like yourself. But you can be a conductor as well, so be careful. Load. Any device that uses power. So when you're talking about lighting, the light fixtures that we use are also loads. So when you're adding how many lights you can put in, you're doing a load calculation. And we'll talk about that as well. Okay. A magnet. Now this. So we all know what a magnet is, but we have no idea how they work. So we're just going to move on. No, that's not true. We do know how magnets work to some degree, but we're not exactly sure the nature of magnets. Other than they do create a field around themselves that attracts and repels subatomic particles like electrons. So they can be useful to corral electrons to create electricity. Because by moving that field around a wire, you can make the electrons in the wire follow the field. and therefore generate motion. Once you get motion, you get current, right? Anyway, I used to do a lesson on magnets. I still might have it. I'm not sure I like it anymore because it is really confusing. It's really just important to know what they do, not so much how they work. Anyway, magnetic field is that force that I just mentioned. Megawatt, 1 million watts. It's only here really in the word list to get used to the idea of mega, kilo, mega, all those orders of magnitude that we'll be talking about, kilohertz, megahertz, megawatts, kilowatts, gigawatts, terabytes, all that stuff. Start getting familiar with which one is which quantity, right? Because it will become important down the road. Meter, something that records the amount of something passing through it, such as electricity. So audio meters is probably your most common meter that you guys have seen, is the little LEDs or needles that move, and if not, you will. We don't so much use them in lighting because it's pretty much a given what the power is. Most of the power stuff you do in lighting is calculations because everything's a sort of known quantity, but with audio it's dynamically changing, so you want to, of course, keep on top of it, right? Motor, a device that converts electrical energy into mechanical energy. So it's the reverse of a generator, right? And some generators, like in Teslas, can be motors. So you make it a motor, and then when you take off the power, it now turns and starts generating. The magnet starts turning and making electricity happen. Right? That's regenerative braking, really. It's a motor that becomes a generator that then creates power back into the system. Not all motors can do that. It requires some tricky wiring. It's not the most efficient way all the time. Otherwise, all electric motors would be generators, because sometimes motors aren't braking. So when you've got a motor that runs, I don't know, a curtain across a room, it doesn't have a braking stage. It's just activating the curtain and it stops, right? So it's not practical to have all motors be generators. Neutron, it's not an electron. That's all you got to know. Nucleus, that's where all these things, neutrons and protons live. Ohms, the unit of measurement of resistance, it's one component of Ohm's law, and we'll talk about Ohm's law. And Ohm's law is how you do your calculations. Remember I said about your calculations. It's how you figure out your resistance versus your power versus your energy. But we won't get to that. So just so you're panicking, because you're probably panicking already on that, we don't get that granular. We do a lot of things where things are given. Like for example, we know that power in Canada is somewhere between 110 and 120 volts, or it's double that. It's 220, 240. That's all we have to worry about, right? I shouldn't say that's all. I'm sorry. There's other powers as well as 308 volt. There's all kinds of three-phase power. Okay. But my point is, there's a few we can start with that are very basic. Once you learn a handful of voltages, the calculations are pretty simple. So you don't need to figure out what the voltage is. That's my point. So we don't have to get right down to that level, but we will use Ohm's law anyway. It's the same. It's the relationship between current, voltage, and work. That's the short story there. So power is the wattage. It's the measure of the rate of transfer, the work being done, right? And it's also a component of Ohm's law. Proton, another particle in the atom. So I mentioned the neutron, the proton, and the electron because those are the particles, the fundamental particles. The electron's the only one we can really harness. We can harness. Physicists can do all kinds of stuff, but we need the electron to make everything work. So what we want to look for is material that gives up its electrons easily, like metal. Metal gives up its electrons fairly easy, so when you push electrons into one end of the metal, it'll jump out the other end, right? Whereas wood, you put electrons on one end, it just says, no, oh, sorry, and it just starts to burn. Yeah, not giving them up. You come take them from my cold, dead hands, right? That's what happens with insulators and wood, so. Radio. So radio is kind of cool. It's a device, but it's also a phenomena. It's two things. I should have put it in the slide. And what it is, it's the magnetic field that electricity creates that in its own can create a magnetic field. So I'm wearing a radio, right, that's transmitting to the camera. The radio is creating a magnetic field that's running across the room to the other end. It is a wire on the antenna, that the electrons in become excited by that magnetic field and run back into the receiver and turn back into sound. So radio is a way to transmit electricity wirelessly, if you will, right? There's wireless charging, but not quite the same thing. That's inductive charging. We'll talk about induction another time. But understand that radio is kind of a weird way. And the weird thing with radio is it's like ripples in a pond. Once you start the wave starting, it will go until it runs out of energy. And in some cases, that's years. So NASA does a lot of studies by pushing satellites up into space and then sending signals off into space, those waves will travel for dozens and dozens of years until they finally run out of gas. Right? So it's kind of a cool, weird phenomenon that we all take for granted because it happens. I mean, here's a radio, right? It's just a radio that receives data, data radio. So, oh, my garage door's closed. Excellent. Okay, resistance. The resistance is the resistance to flow of electricity through material. The less resistant, the more useful it is to us because it becomes a conductor, and ohms are what measure resistance. Socket or outlet, something you plug things into. Pretty straightforward. You can tell I'm reaching for some of these terms. Spike or transient. So these are important in that they're short, really short. Like what they say, half a cycle. So it's instantaneous. Think of a transient where you get a sudden bink of electrical energy. That's a transient. As opposed to a surge, which is a much longer, like the tide coming in. A surge is a much longer lasting, which I think is the next, oh, there's static. Static is, I'll go back to this. So a surge, we'll talk about in a second, but a surge is a much longer lasting phenomenon, can last for minutes. That's what blows up your computer at home. Transients don't tend to because they're so short unless they're really intense. Transients of light can blind you, right? Transients aren't always electricity, but it's unlikely that you'll get any side effects from a transient that's permanent. A surge, however, can be really damaging. Static electricity is the charge between two dissimilar materials, and what that means is one has too many electrons and one doesn't, and the electrons want to move. They want to go back to balance. So if you've been walking on a rug and you go to touch a doorknob, the metal doorknob doesn't have as many electrons as you do, and it wants the electrons that you've picked up off the rug because the rug gives them up, and bingo, you get a shock. And then you don't get a shock. This is the thing about static, remembering about the balance. When you touch the doorknob and get a shock, it doesn't last. It's instantaneous because once that electrical energy is back to zero, everybody's happy, except now you because your finger hurts. And a trick, by the way, I don't know if you guys know the trick of slapping the doorknob. If you think you're going to get a shock, just hit it with your finger, or slap it with your hand, because the hitting with your hand distracts you from the shock, and you don't feel the shock. You see people do it all the time. You'll get up to a gear, and a person will go like that. It'll discharge the shock, and at the same time, you don't feel it, if that kind of thing bugs you. Some people like it. They'll rub their feet and go. That's weird. Okay, surge, a long duration of increased voltage. These are damaging. Switch, things that break and make connections. It's a way to control electricity, right? If the path is broken, electricity won't move. All of this we talk about in the next couple of weeks, so don't worry too much. Thermal, that's not supposed to be there. That won't be in the quiz. Transformer, this is a device that raises and lowers voltage or current. Very handy to take the 140,000 volts that come from the power dam down to 110 volts in our building. A series of transformers step it down. So the wires you see power poles like down Highway 1 and all these other places. One of the reasons they're up so high is because the voltage is really high, and they've got to get them away from us. But as the voltage gets stepped down, they get into regular telephone poles and then into your house, right? There's a transformer usually every half a block in a city that steps the voltage down to something that goes to 3 or 4 homes, and then inside the house, we're all happy. Those are all transformers. We'll talk about them too because they're very handy in audio. Volt is how we measure force. So if you think of voltage as the analogy to the pressure, if current is the motion, volt is what's pushing it, okay? And the watt is the work. And that's how you explain how powerful something is. How many watts? Audio, how many watts is it pushing out? Right? Even horsepower in Europe is expressed in watts for cars. You'll see car rating with so many 100 or 1,000 kilowatts or watts of power. Right? Watts is an expression of power. That's it. So have a look at the words. When the quiz opens, I think it opens at noon. Give it a kick, see what happens. Don't panic, like I said, the stakes are really low. But it's a good way for you to test, A, that everyone can use Learning Hub, B, that you guys have got the information. You know, it's kind of a low impact and yet useful. I didn't want to give you something totally nonsense, you know, like match the green dog with the yellow dog and, you know, all that kind of stuff. Let's have an actual quiz because you can use this glossary all term. It'll come in handy for you, right? So keep it as a reference. And you guys know how to download stuff off Learning Hub? Yeah, good. All right. You guys are way further ahead than your predecessors ever were. What else? Where else are we in our agenda? Oh yeah, Tom Cruise video. There's a good chance we'll be done early today, by the way. The glossary you've got, the Tom Cruise, the bio we did. The science of static. I'm thinking I'll hold off on the electrical stuff. These two, so during the lockdown, these two little mini lessons were just to get people used to stuff remotely, but we're going to all be here together. So next week, I will do the whole electrical thing in one go, rather than a bit of static today. Static, I'm always weird about static. Static is a thing that you don't like in our business, but not something you have to know a lot about. So I'll mention it, it's a thing, and then we'll just, so that's all I got. And it's 10 to 10. So have you got any questions? Is there anything you want to know? Anything you expected to learn that you're not going to learn here? Yes?
So you might have already went over this, but is that PowerPoint with the definitions of the words on the Learning Hub?
Yes. Yes, it is. This is it right there. Yes?
When you say the quiz will be down tomorrow, does that mean kind of midnight tonight?
Yes, 12:01 a.m. They finally, after I don't know how many years we had this Learning Hub software, it used to end at 11, the day would end at 11:30. So whenever you wanted to close something at midnight, you couldn't. It was really weird. So they've now put in 12:01 a.m. So that's when it should shut down. And that'll flush out people who haven't done it yet, can't log in. So again, it's not a trap, right? So understand too that our job here is not to trick you. This is post-secondary education, so you've paid for this, right? The state may have paid for some of it, but in high school and before, you're kind of a guest of the state. You kind of have to be there, by law, I think, until you're, is it 15? I forget what year you can leave school, and that may have changed. Maybe you can't anymore. But anyway, in post-secondary, it's your nickel, so we don't want to trap you in anything. We're not trying to, gotcha, you failed, you're out, right? It doesn't help us at all. In fact, it hurts us, our bottom line, because now we have one less paying customer. So let's make it all work, and that's my effort here is to, because I know some of you are still in that sort of secondary school mentality, like, oh my God, it's a test, lots at stake here, I better pass this or my grade point average is going to die. No, again, the grade per question in this particular quiz is 1/40th of 1/10 of the quizzes, which is only 40% of the whole term. So it's a really tiny, but it's a good way to find out everything's working. Yes?
What is the midterm and the final going to look like?
Well, there's no midterm. There'll be a spot quiz, which I will spring on you at some point when I think you're ready for it. It'll be short, it'll be in class, it'll be on paper. It won't be like, I won't spring it on you like, now here it is. But I'll give you like a little bit of heads up that there's a quiz coming. And it'll be kind of a sort of a midterm. I don't like midterms, to be honest, because I don't think we can divide the term in half. Like, it's not that kind of course where, okay, we've learned, so the first couple of lessons is electricity, and I think it's audio next, right? It's been so long. No, it's light. So then we talk about audio, any midterm is artificial to me in this course. We're not running through a progression of everything about electricity from basics all the way to the end, so there's no midpoint to me. So I used to do, because I was sort of mechanical, I would do midterms because we had to have one. And then I asked one day, do we have to have one? See, I asked. There's the lesson of the industry. I asked somebody one day, do we have to have midterms? No. Oh, well, done. So I increased the stakes on the quizzes, because now they're worth more. They used to be worth way less. The quizzes are now worth 40% as an aggregate of your mark. And now there'll be a spot quiz, I think worth 10%, and the final, which is worth the other 40, yeah. The final will be, I'm not sure, because so the first time we were in here, at home, we had no final. We had no time. March break happened, and this is again ancient history now. March break happened, we all went home. There was no time to get finals together before April because we didn't have a mechanism. So nobody had ever done a final remotely. So I just didn't have a final. So the second year is kind of, they didn't get a final that year, or the first year. No, they graduated now? Wait. No, it was only last year. Just it seems like so weird. Time compression. Anyway, so then for the next term, 22-22, I had an online final, which I have, and I created an online final for this class. But I'm thinking if everything sort of eases off by Christmas, right? I mean, either we're running around with our hair on fire, or we're all comfortable again, and we'll have a paper final exam. So either way, it's worth 40%. Either way, it's about 120 questions. So maybe 200, depending. If it's paper, it's longer. So I had more questions. So there you go. There's the final. So don't panic about midterms. You guys got enough to do. You're going to find yourself overwhelmed by next week because the assignments start piling up too. That's the other thing I'm aware of too, right? This is constant load, to use an electrical analogy. This is a constant load where every week it's the same thing. Lesson, quiz, lesson, quiz, lesson, quiz. And then at the end at Christmas, just when everybody thinks that they're done, or holiday time, whatever you want to call it, then we drop the bomb on you and have the final exam. But that week happens when there's no classes, so hopefully nothing else is due, right? Although some naughty instructors in this program will let you go late with the assignment, which only makes it worse in my mind, because now you've got more time to not study for me. But yeah, so everybody else's stuff is all over the place. So I don't want to be adding to that problem. Any other questions, comments? Yes?
Is there any recommended or required textbook for this course?
No, so all the materials you'll find, so for example, I'll put in, do I have a section here? Here. I'll put in a section called Helpful Study Materials. So here it is for next week. And a lot of this is stuff, these are linked, here, I don't know if you can see this, make it bigger. So there's the lesson. Oh. Here, right? And then there's all this study material here. So that's what I use. And so this is stuff I've used to make the lesson. So it's not, and I'll tell you why, because Googling can be your enemy. I've done some Googling even this term for sort of fresh material and found all kinds of flaws. Because people will say things, and this is what's unfortunate about, and some of them are very authoritative. They'll say some fairly serious things about power usage or light safety, and they'll be totally wrong. And you're like, how could they do that? A good example, you guys haven't come across it yet, but is the C stand, which is a metal stand that has 3 legs. One leg is longer than the other, right? And the idea is the stand has an arm, and you use it to hang lights, you use it for all kinds of, it's a handy just thing to hang stuff off of. It's like a portable clothes rack, if you will, for the business. C stands are everywhere. Anyway. Yeah, there you go, you see? Someone who's a connoisseur of C stands already. But nonetheless, this fellow did a video. He's got the belt on, all the tools, and he's a Hollywood film person, and yada, yada, yada. And he does this whole thing, and he says, whatever you do, when you have the arm with something heavy on it, make sure the long leg is facing the other way for balance. And I'm like, no. Because now what you've got, if you can imagine what it looks like, I get to go to the board. The legs look like this. You've got a leg and then 2 short legs. And what he's saying is when the arm, if you're looking down at the stand looks like this, right? There's the legs. There's the little, it's called the knuckle, and there's the stand, right? So what he's saying is when this is extended, have it go this way. Well, what's wrong with that? There's nothing there. Like there's a gap, right? So if there's a weight here, it's just going to pull the stand over because there's nothing under the arm to stop it from tipping. Now this is a guy who's got thousands of views in this video, and I was going to use it in a training course a couple of years ago, and I thought, this is crazy. And people, oh man, that's a great video, thanks, I know how to use C-stands now. So I caution you that you've got to be very careful. I'm not saying it's all poison, but there's lots of people who say things that don't make any sense. Even some fairly well-known people, fairly well-known like Filmmaker IQ, and there's a few other websites that do lots of film instructional videos. They'll say the odd thing that's like, and you can tell they're guessing once you sort of understand their shtick. You can see they've guessed about that fact, and they just blurt it out, and you write it down as a fact, and off you go. So my point is, I try to use what I looked at to build the course as the reference material. This is not to say you shouldn't look stuff up, but just be careful you compare things, right? The worst search you can ever do in your life is what is the best camera for blank. First off, the first 4 pages are Amazon sponsored links or Amazon partners about selling you the camera. And then you've got a bunch of people who hate that camera and a bunch of people who love that camera, especially if that camera is not, like if it's a Blackmagic, you'll get the first few links are the Sony lovers who hate the Blackmagic. And then the next couple links are the Blackmagic lovers who say, well, Blackmagic can't do anything wrong, all their stuff's fantastic. So you can see already, you asked this question, so what you have to do instead is you end up reading about 4 or 5 different links before you start piecing it together yourself, right? And we'll talk about that. I haven't got any trouble at all in going off in the woods if it helps you guys find your way through this whole messy business. Because the very important thing about this business is, especially when it comes to equipment, and some of you who bought hardware already know that the vendor, the salesperson, just wants your money. And unless you trust them, and even that's tough to do, because I used to be in retail. I know what that's like, being the vendor. It's hard to get a right answer, right? You go to Henry's Camera and buy a camera. Henry's will sell you what Henry's is selling. You go online to B&H and they'll sell you what B&H is selling. Well, which one's better? I don't know. Who do you like, right? And so this is the other thing. Sometimes things aren't always better, right? I'm looking for a better GoPro. Haven't found it yet, right? Because when you go start comparing cameras that aren't GoPros with GoPros, first you get the people to say, well, it's like the fan people, trying to be generic, who say, oh, Tesla's the best car ever. There's no point even talking anymore. Made the best car in the world. In the history of cars, Tesla's the best car ever. Well, then I'm not even going to look at your stuff, because anything you're going to say about it's going to be fantastic. And then you go to a site, for example, if you're a car person like Jalopnik, and they hate Tesla. So anytime Tesla does something wrong, Tesla had a crash. They do a 4-page article on Tesla having a crash. Oh, look at this failed and that didn't go right? Well, so how do you understand that when you're trying to buy gear? You're trying to buy laptops. So, for example, the new MacBook Pros. Most of the professional software is not yet written for it. So I caution anyone against buying it until the professionals commit. Now, you know Apple's such a big elephant in the computer world that they'll have to commit at some point. But unless you need a computer, you know, this is the thing. Wait. I said, because I'm in that very boat. I've got this 2016 Intel MacBook Pro, and I want a new MacBook Pro. But I can't find one with 32 gigs of RAM. Don't make it, because now they've moved to system on a chip, which means the RAM's soldered into the entire system. There's no way to change the RAM. You buy it with 16 gigs, you have 16 gigs forever. I bought this with 16 gigs 5 years ago, and it wasn't enough as soon as 4K came along. And 4K came along, what, 2.5 years ago or so? I mean, it came along before that, but as far as being sort of commercially available and software being kind of cheap and affordable and hard drives being relatively cheap and now it's usable. So I can do 4K, but I can only do a couple of streams. I got to do it in half resolution. You know, I'm telling you this whole ugly story. But if I had gone to the computer store, the Apple store, I went there just the other day to get a quote on a couple of things. They're, oh yeah, no, you can totally do all that stuff. Have you ever done it? Do you know what I do? Well, no, but and then the salesperson starts backpedaling. Well, you know, all our customers from, you know, the film companies come and buy them. Okay, it's not a recommendation. So we'll try to help you through that. Understand some of this foundational stuff. Learn to be more analytical about stuff. Because it is daunting, and it's unfortunate when people start spending a lot of money on stuff and they're not happy. You buy a fantastic camera, and then you find out, and I remember a few years ago, a student bought a Panasonic DSLR that had a real weakness at night. It was really noisy and grainy at night. So what did that mean for them? Well, they had to have lights. They didn't want to have lights. They'd bought a different camera, they might have had more sensitivity at night. But then you sacrifice something else. It might not be as sharp, it might not have the right lenses, it might, you know what I mean? Like there's never going to be a perfect answer. That's the other thing you'll find. You'll start hoarding. You'll have your night camera, you'll have your action camera, you'll have your cinema camera, you'll have, you know, or your audio kit, you'll have your microphone for singers, your microphone for drum kits. Like a drum kit, here's a good example. There's probably 6 or 7 microphones in one drum kit alone. There's one for the kick drum, there's one for the snare, there's one for the cymbal, there's one for, you know, the toms. They all have different responses, right? Because you don't want to be doing EQ on the drums, you just want to have the microphone sound that way. So if you're an audio person, you've got 6 or 7 microphones, off you go, right? So anyway, not that it's disheartening, it's just hard work. Trying to find the truth is hard work in this business. And especially when you start spending lots of money, it's counterintuitive. You think the more money you spend, the more accurate people will be. No, not always. I was at CBC, we spent, well, I'll give you an example. We bought a $200,000 videotape recording machine, the early digital machine, and it lasted 3 months and failed until they finally had to bring a technician in to live across the street at the hotel behind the CBC and come in every day for 2 weeks to re-engineer the machine on the spot, right? Now that was disappointing for us because we have this $250,000 piece of hardware, it doesn't work. It was supposed to work, it looked great on paper, everybody loved it, didn't work. And didn't work for simple reasons. It was physics in this case, it was mechanically not working properly. And in the end they fixed it, but then now you're thinking, it's like buying a car. You know, you buy a brand new car and it breaks down 10 times in the first 2 months, and then it stops breaking down. From that point on, you're always going to think, well, when's the next breakdown coming, right? You lose your faith in it. So it is a tough role to find stuff. And any of us, not just myself, any of my colleagues would be more than helpful as far as finding out gear. You'll never find the right, perfect piece of gear unless you've tried it yourself. That's the bottom line. So going back to being an expert, Part of expertise, like riding a bicycle. Some people are more comfortable on certain bicycles than other people. Find the bike that works for you, master it. Be able to do wheelies down the stairs backwards, right, on whatever bicycle you choose, and you'll be invaluable. And on that note, I'm done. Thank you all. Thanks for coming out. I hope it all went well. I hope it meets your expectations. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Hello to Iran.